It's Thebes, 1300 BC, and you are standing in the private quarters of a moderately wealthy scribe's house, looking at a low limestone seat with a keyhole-shaped opening cut into the top. Underneath it sits a removable ceramic bowl, half filled with sand. This is the toilet. There is no plumbing behind that wall. There is no pipe leading anywhere. And yet the household using it is, in real terms, dealing with human waste more carefully than most of Europe would manage for the next 3,000 years. That should sound wrong. It isn't. Here's the assumption baked into the question people ask about this. We picture ancient toilets as a hole in the ground. Or worse, nothing at all, a bush, a field, a river, and hope for the best. That's roughly true for most of history, most places, including plenty of cities you'd consider advanced right up through the 1800s. Egypt is the outlier, and not by a small margin. Today we're going through all of it. The household seat, the drainage systems built into entire towns, the doctors who specialized in exactly this part of the body, the medical texts, the religious hygiene codes, and the twist at the end, which is that a civilization obsessed with the afterlife turns out to have been just as obsessed with the very unglamorous business of what goes on inside the body while you're alive. By the end of this, the joke about ancient people not knowing what a toilet was is going to be pointed the other way. Start with the object, because it's stranger and more deliberate than hole in the ground. In wealthier Egyptian homes, archaeologists have found limestone or wooden toilet seats shaped almost exactly like the ones we use today, a flat seat, a keyhole-shaped opening positioned over a container. That container was usually a large pottery bowl or a wooden box filled with sand. You didn't flush anything. You used it. And the sand absorbed and covered the waste. The same basic principle as a modern litter box. Afterward, a servant emptied and refreshed the container. It isn't glamorous, but it's a system. Someone designed the seat height, someone chose sand as the absorbent material, someone assigned the job of emptying it. That's infrastructure, just without pipes. The design wasn't uniform across the country either, which tells you something on its own. Excavated examples vary in height, in the shape of the keyhole opening, and in the material. Limestone for wealthier households, wood for a more modest version of the same idea. That kind of variation usually shows up when something has been refined by trial and error over generations, not when it's a one-off novelty. A toilet seat carved from limestone represents real labor and real cost in a world without power tools. Someone judged that labor worth spending on comfort during something most cultures barely bothered to think about at all. At the workers' village of Deir el-Medina, archaeologists have excavated actual toilet installations built into the houses, not luxury items, but standard household features for skilled laborers, not just nobility. These weren't the tomb builders' employers living well while the workers suffered. The men who carved the tombs of pharaohs had toilets in their own homes, built to a similar standard. The site of Amarna, the short-lived capital built under Akhenaten in the 1300s BCE, has produced similar wooden and ceramic toilet fittings in ordinary homes, sometimes even multiple units in a single household. This wasn't a royal privilege. It was a household expectation, the way you'd expect a working sink today, and it shows up across an unusually wide slice of the social ladder for something this old. Here's the part people skip over. Capturing waste in a bowl of sand only solves half the problem. The other half is what happens next, and Egypt had an answer for that too. At the planned town of Kahun, built around 1900 BC to house workers constructing a pyramid complex, archaeologists found homes with dedicated bathroom rooms. Some fitted with drainage channels that carried wastewater out of the house and into the street or a designated pit. That's not an accident. Someone laid those channels out during construction, which means someone was thinking about sanitation before the walls even went up. It isn't a lucky byproduct of good architecture. It's the architecture being built around the problem on purpose, at the scale of an entire planned settlement, roughly 4,000 years before urban planning was a phrase anyone used. Kahun is worth sitting with for a second because it wasn't an organic city that grew haphazardly over centuries. It was built fast, on a grid, to house a specific workforce for a specific project, which means every feature in it, including the bathrooms, reflects a deliberate decision made by someone in charge of the build. Waste management wasn't an afterthought bolted onto existing houses. It was part of the blueprint from day one, alongside the granaries and the worker housing itself. In larger towns, cesspits sealed underground waste pits served entire households or clusters of homes. Periodically dug out and the contents hauled away, most likely used afterward as agricultural fertilizer. There's a second layer to this worth noticing. The Nile floodplain that fed the entire civilization was replenished partly by human waste being deliberately returned to the soil. What looks disgusting from a distance is, up close, a functioning nutrient cycle, running millennia before anyone coined the term compost. Nothing about this was wasted. In the most literal sense of the word, grain-fed people fed the fields, and the whole loop kept running on itself, season after season, for millennia. This is the part that genuinely surprises people. So, let's slow down. Ancient Egyptian medicine had specialists, not general physicians who did everything actual specialists, the way you'd see a cardiologist today instead of a family doctor. And one of the recorded specialties translates roughly to guardian of the Royal Rectum, a physician whose entire job, at least at the royal court, revolved around digestive and intestinal health. It sounds like a punchline. It's a real title, recorded on surviving inscriptions, because the Egyptians took internal health seriously enough to build a career out of one specific organ system, at the very top of society, attending to the pharaoh himself. That seriousness shows up in the medical texts. The Ebers Papyrus, dated to roughly 1550 BCE and one of the oldest surviving medical documents on Earth, is nearly 20 meters long when unrolled, and devotes a significant portion of its content to digestive complaints, constipation, diarrhea, parasites, bloating, and prescribes remedies for all of it, including enemas, laxatives made from castor oil, and dietary adjustments involving figs, dates, and bran. Some of these treatments are, frankly, guesswork dressed up as medicine, mixed freely with incantations and appeals to specific gods. Some of them, castor oil as a laxative, for instance, are still recommended today, nearly 4,000 years later, virtually unchanged. The empirical and the magical sit side by side on the same scroll with no sense that one undermines the other. And they had real reasons to worry. Egyptian mummies show extensive evidence of intestinal parasites, including schistosomiasis and tapeworm, both linked directly to contact with contaminated Nile water and poorly managed waste. Paleopathologists examining preserved tissue have found calcified parasite eggs well preserved enough to identify the exact species involved, thousands of years after the person died. Digestive illness wasn't an embarrassing inconvenience in ancient Egypt. It was a leading, measurable cause of suffering and death, which is exactly why an entire branch of medicine grew up around it, complete with its own specialists, its own textbook, and its own vocabulary. Here's where the motivation gets interesting, because it wasn't purely medical. It was also sacred. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing after visiting Egypt around 450 BC, described Egyptian priests as remarkably strict about physical cleanliness, bathing multiple times a day, shaving their entire bodies regularly, including eyebrows, and following specific washing rituals before entering temples. Priests weren't just expected to be spiritually pure. They were required to be physically, visibly clean on a schedule as a condition of doing their job. It isn't optional hygiene. It's codified hygiene, written into the requirements of the priesthood itself, with rules about which fabrics could touch the skin, since wool was considered ritually impure in a temple context and linen wasn't. That same logic extended outward into ordinary religious practice. Ritual purity before temple visits, before touching sacred objects, before major ceremonies, all of it involved washing. And some scholars connect this directly to lower rates of certain infections among priestly classes compared to the general population, though the evidence here is harder to pin down precisely than the physical remains of toilets and drains. What's clear is the underlying belief the body's waste and the body's cleanliness weren't separate from religion. They were part of it, threaded into the same worldview that governed temple ritual and cosmic order alike. You've got the seat, the drainage, the doctors, the religious hygiene codes. There's one more gap. What did people actually use to clean themselves afterward? Toilet paper, as we know, it doesn't show up anywhere in the ancient world. It's a genuinely modern invention, dating only to the 1800s. In Egypt, the most likely answer, based on surviving evidence and comparison with neighboring ancient cultures, is water, along with cloth that could be washed and reused, and in some cases smooth stones or broken pottery fragments, a method also documented in ancient Greece and Rome, where fragments of pottery used for exactly this purpose have actually been recovered from latrine sites. None of this was written down in Egypt as a formal instruction manual, for understandable reasons, so historians are piecing it together from indirect evidence and comparison rather than a single confirmed source. It's the one part of this entire system where the confident specificity runs out which, honestly, tracks. Some details of daily life were considered too mundane to record even by a civilization that recorded almost everything else, down to a physician's job title for a single organ. And here's where this whole story turns over. We've been treating Egyptian toilet habits as a strange little footnote and oddly specific curiosity sitting off to the side of real Egyptian history, the pyramids and the pharaohs and the gods. But it isn't a footnote. It's a preview. This is a civilization that spent enormous resources preparing the body for the afterlife mummification, organ removal, and preservation. Elaborate rituals to keep the body intact for eternity, with entire specialized professions built around doing it correctly. That entire belief system rests on one core idea: the physical body matters, in precise, unglamorous biological detail, not just symbolically. Once you see that, the toilet seats and the intestinal specialists and the ritual bathing schedules stop looking like an unrelated curiosity and start looking like the exact same worldview, just applied to the living instead of the dead. The Egyptians didn't compartmentalize the sacred and the bodily the way we tend to. Managing waste, managing digestion, managing physical cleanliness, all of it sat on the same continuum as preparing a body for eternity. The bathroom wasn't beneath their attention. It was part of the same system that built the pyramids, run by the same civilization that couldn't stand the idea of leaving anything about the body to chance, whether that body was alive at a scribe's desk or lying in a tomb waiting for judgment. And this is the part that should sting a little. For roughly 3,000 years after this, most of the world backslid. Medieval European cities dumped waste directly into streets and rivers, and chamber pots were emptied straight out of windows, sometimes with a shouted warning, sometimes without one. London didn't get a comprehensive modern sewer system until the 1860s, built specifically because untreated waste in the Thames was killing people through repeated, devastating cholera outbreaks. We had the Kahun and Deir el-Medina model, functioning, documented, working, thousands of years earlier planned drainage, dedicated specialists. Hygiene written into law, and large parts of the world simply didn't keep it, had to rediscover it from scratch, city by city, epidemic by epidemic. So picture that scribe's house again. A limestone seat with a keyhole cut into the top. A ceramic bowl of sand underneath it, quietly doing its job. A drainage channel, somewhere nearby, laid into the foundation on purpose, before the first wall ever went up. A physician down the street whose entire career is built around exactly this part of the body. A priest, somewhere across town, washing for the third time that day before he's allowed near anything sacred. None of it needed electricity, and none of it needed germ theory to work reasonably well. It needed attention, the same unglamorous, sustained attention the Egyptians gave to almost everything else about staying alive in a difficult place. The pyramids get the postcards. This is the part that actually kept people alive and working long enough to build them. Would you trade your bathroom for theirs? Sand instead of a flush, water instead of paper, and a doctor whose entire job title is about your intestines. Let me know in the comments. See you soon.